Did you know Canada's biggest source of pride is actually a dangerously constructed lie? We were taught to believe, no questions asked, that our universal healthcare system is an unshakable free fortress, but the harsh reality of packed emergency rooms proves the exact opposite. 60 years ago, the very father of Canadian healthcare predicted this collapse down to the last detail and left behind a secret warning that politicians tried to bury 6 feet under. Buckle up, because in the next few minutes you're going to uncover the forgotten conspiracy that turned our nation's greatest right into a wildly profitable billion-dollar business. Topic 1. The illusion of a perfect system and the shock of today's reality. From the outside looking in, the average Canadian tends to puff out their chest with pride when talking about their universal healthcare system, treating it like some unshakable fortress. But anyone who's needed emergency care on a winter night in Toronto or Vancouver quickly realizes that looks can be seriously deceiving. It's like buying a gorgeous imported car only to find out, halfway down the highway, that the engine's about to blow because nobody bothered with basic maintenance. The plain, hard truth is that the current model has turned into a rusty old gear system, where patience gets tested to the max in cold, overcrowded waiting rooms. To really get how this all fell apart, picture investing your hard-earned cash into stocks that seemed like a sure thing, while completely ignoring the risk reports. That's basically what the average Canadian did, outsourcing the oversight of their own health to government bureaucracy, trusting blindly that the state would take care of everything forever. Classic books on strategy and growth teach us that a society's biggest mistake is getting comfortable at the top, forgetting to protect its greatest achievements from greed and the wear and tear of time. That blind pride ended up paving the road straight to the crisis now haunting hospitals from coast to coast. The collective pain this country feels today in those ER lineups didn't just show up overnight because of pure administrative incompetence. It grew out of predictable historical neglect. Whenever a system ignores its structural foundations in favor of quick surface-level fixes, the bill that comes due later tends to be brutally high and painful. There's a massive gap between political idealism and the harsh reality of someone stuck waiting 12 hours for a simple doctor's visit. And here's the wild part. This whole perfect storm was mapped out, down to the smallest detail, by a man who understood human weakness better than anyone. Topic 2. The childhood trauma in Winnipeg and a boy's promise. To really understand the mind of a visionary, you've got to dig through the wreckage of his past and find out where his armor was forged. In the early part of the last century, on the cold, working-class streets of Winnipeg, a young Scottish immigrant boy felt the full weight of a merciless fate. Diagnosed with a serious bone infection in his leg, the kid watched despair take over his household, simply because his family couldn't scrape together enough money to pay a private surgeon. That physical pain, mixed with his parents' feeling of helplessness, left a scar on the boy's soul that ran way deeper than anything on his leg bone. That dramatic chapter teaches us that life's biggest turning points are usually born in our most vulnerable moments, when we're forced to make a drastic call. If that boy had accepted amputation as a done deal, modern Canadian history would look completely different, and a whole lot darker. It was thanks to the generous intervention of a humanitarian doctor who operated on the kid for free just to teach his students that both the boy's leg and his future were saved. Right there, in that charity hospital bed, a quiet, unbreakable promise was born, one that would shape an entire nation for decades to come. That young boy, who the world would later know as the architect of social welfare, promised himself that no other Canadian child would ever go through that kind of humiliation. Long before entering public life, he understood that health couldn't be a privilege reserved for people with fat bank accounts. It had to be a basic right for every human being. That deep conviction turned a traumatized kid into a stubborn, determined leader, ready to challenge the status quo and take on the most powerful men of his time. Little did he know his first real battle wouldn't be fought in a hospital, but behind closed doors in a local government that was seriously resistant to change. If you're loving uncovering these secrets that the official history books like to sweep under the rug, come join our little circle and hit subscribe on the channel right now. We've got a big, bold goal of hitting our first 1,000 subscribers to prove that Canadians still value truth and depth. And your click is the fuel that keeps this investigation going. Topic 3. The Saskatchewan experiment and the birth of an archenemy. When he took over the government of Saskatchewan in 1944, that former shepherd boy decided it was finally time to turn his childhood promise into real law. He turned that poverty-stricken farming province into a genuine social laboratory, rolling out the first state-funded health insurance plan in North America. It was an incredibly bold move, kind of like an entrepreneur launching a disruptive product with zero backing from the big financial players. That local initiative's smashing success proved the utopia was actually achievable. But it also set off alarm bells in the fanciest offices across the continent. The big economic empires and traditional medical corporations quickly clued in that this successful model was a direct threat to their sky-high profit margins. If public health care worked perfectly there, the idea would spread like wildfire across Canada, and worse, it could cross the border into the US. That's exactly when the market's hidden powers started scheming in the shadows to sabotage the project by any means necessary. Pharmaceutical cartels and powerful associations joined forces, cooking up an aggressive propaganda machine that painted the Canadian leader as dangerous and authoritarian. The clash brewing wasn't just some bureaucratic fight over taxes or hospital budgets. It was a deep ideological war over the value of human life. Our charismatic pioneer knew he was walking through a minefield, where one wrong step could bury the dream of fair health care for good. He held his ground, using his down-to-earth communication style to shield the public from the fake news of the era and keep his army of supporters engaged. Little did citizens know the project's opponents were about to play their dirtiest, most desperate card. Yet, crossing a line nobody saw coming. Topic 4. The 1962 conspiracy, the doctors' strike that shut down the province. The year was 1962, and Saskatchewan became the stage for one of the most dramatic and shadowy chapters in Canadian history. On the exact day universal health care officially kicked in, nearly every doctor in the province crossed their arms and shut their office doors. This unprecedented strike, secretly stirred up and funded by big medical corporations and private interests south of the border, plunged the population into total panic. It was the modern-day equivalent of every essential tech and communication service crashing all at once, leaving citizens completely stranded in the dark. The media of the time, largely controlled by financial elites, pulled no punches, painting the project's mastermind as a cruel villain who didn't care about doctors' demands. He was bombarded with death threats daily, branded a communist, and accused of trying to enslave medical professionals under the government's thumb. In moments of extreme crisis like this, most leaders back down and tear up their promises to save their own skin or lock in re-election. But this charismatic leader kept his cool, acting like a mentor who understands that real progress always comes at the cost of walking through fire. To get around the boycott and save lives, he launched a full-on humanized communication campaign, flying in volunteer doctors from the UK and the US to handle emergencies. That stubborn resistance eventually broke the strike's momentum after 23 days of absolute chaos and tense behind-the-scenes negotiations. The healthcare plan survived the toughest trial by fire any public policy has ever faced, proving how solid it really was and paving the way for the whole country to adopt it. But behind the scenes of that historic win, the old leader knew his enemies hadn't given up. They'd just switched to a long game. Topic 5. The Twisted Legacy and the Second Half of the Warning Canada Forgot. Watching his model get adopted nationwide, that old statesman gave a grim warning that most Canadians, sadly, chose to ignore in the glow of victory. He warned that creating health insurance was only phase 1 of a much longer journey, and that the real danger lay in future generations getting too comfortable. In his view, if the system didn't evolve to focus on prevention and preventive health, bureaucracy and private greed would eventually eat it alive from the inside out. It's exactly like an investor who builds a solid nest egg but forgets to protect it from hidden taxes and inflation over the years. Decades after he passed, The same big corporations defeated back in 1962 found a new way to work their way into the heart of Canadian public health care. Through quiet underfunding and massive political lobbying, they managed to plant the narrative that the public system is inefficient and that privatization is the only way out. That slow-burn weakening strategy turned the nation's greatest source of pride into a system running on fumes, creating the painful lineups we see today. The prophecy played out down to the last detail. The system didn't collapse by accident. It collapsed because Canada forgot to apply the second half of its creator's formula. The big takeaway from this whole investigation is that rights that aren't defended every single day eventually get turned into a product by the financial market. To change that, classic books on power and influence suggest people need to take back their role as watchdogs over their leaders' actions. Digging deep into the journeys of these forgotten heroes is the first real step for any citizen who wants to reclaim control over their own well-being. History isn't just a pile of old facts, it's a rearview mirror showing us exactly where we went wrong and how to get back on track. Conclusion. After everything revealed today, the harsh truth is you can't afford to just sit back as a passive spectator, while Tommy Douglas's legacy gets dismantled right before your eyes. Books like Think and Grow Rich remind us that knowledge without action is completely useless. And now the decision is entirely in your hands. Are you going to keep accepting the system's excuses, or are you finally going to demand control over your own well-being? Drop your honest opinion in the comments below, because smart debate is the first real step toward changing the course of our history. To keep getting these deep, exclusive investigations that no mainstream TV channel would ever have the guts to air, subscribe to the channel right now and hit that notification bell.